You're now listening to Sound Talent Media. Check out more shows at soundtalentmedia.com.
Hey, what's up, everyone? I'm Matt McGachy, the vocalist of Cryptopsy and the host of the Vox and Hops Metal Podcast, where I sit down with fellow metal musicians. We talk all about their lives and music while sharing killer craft beers. If you've ever wanted to sneak backstage and share a beer with one of your favorite musicians, well, Vox and Hops is the podcast for you. This week on the podcast, I dropped a killer episode with Kelly Schaefer of Atheist. There is this episode and over 440 other ones to help you enjoy life, metal, and craft beer. So what are you waiting for? It's time to become a Vox and Hops head. Cheers!
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Tone Mob Podcast. Thank you very much for showing up. I really appreciate you spending this time with me. I don't have too much to plug before we get right into this episode, but I do want to let you know about another podcast that I was recently a guest on. I was on the Man the Helm podcast with my dude Jake, and I had a really good time. We dug more heavily into my whole backstory than I think I've done on any other podcast that I've been interviewed on. And I just really enjoyed the conversation. So if you check out Man the Helm podcast, it's on Spotify. And I think it recently just got on Apple Podcast as well. It's very similar in format to this one, where it's just fun conversations with people. My co-host on Chasing Tone, Richard Oliver, was also on recently, as well as a guest that's coming up on the Tone Mob, Stay Metal Ray, who is a fantastic YouTuber and personality. And Jake does a great job with the podcast. So go check out Man the Helm podcast, wherever you're listening to this, most likely. All right, without further ado, let's get into this episode with my dude, Alex from Science Amps. This is a great conversation. Here we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Tone Mob Podcast, the show about guitar stuff occasionally, sometimes. I'm your host, Blake Weiland, and with me today, I have Alex Gaziano from Science Amps. How's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Dude, I've been meaning to actually do this for a long time because I've been following you on socials for 5 years and just
Aw, shucks.
looking at the builds and watching little videos here and there as they pop up. They're not as frequent as I would like, but man, your stuff is amazing, dude.
If I had more time, I would love to make more videos. It's good to get good to get the encouragement, though.
Yeah. Well, the first time I saw it, I feel like it just I don't even remember how I found your stuff. Like somebody I follow posted it, or I found it. I don't know. The algorithm blessed me with an image or something. I'm not really sure. But it was immediately I was like, wow, I can tell the attention to detail that goes into these things is extremely high. And the vibe is just right for me. I loved it. So you do good work.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah. So cool. For my own education, because, as much as I've been stalking your images all these years, I don't know that much about you or your story and how you came to be making these awesome amps.
I like to keep it pretty mysterious. No, I actually started the business in 2009, and I was living I'm in Seattle now, in South Seattle, and I've kind of popped around the Northwest. But I started in Olympia, Washington, where I went to school at the Evergreen State College, and then just working on, I still work out of a home shop, but I started at a very small shop, and I apprenticed for, I Googled tube amps, Olympia. I decided I wanted to learn how to fix my own amps. So this was a little before then, and I found a guy, and I just cold emailed him. His name's Dale Murrow, and he said, "Yeah, come over. I'll show you some stuff." Which now in retrospect is I realize is really rare. Most people don't respond to those kind of emails or say, "Leave me alone. I don't have time." Mm-hmm. But he was doing repairs for a local shop, and he still makes amps. I think he's still making amps under the name Old School Amps. And he he showed me like what tools to get, some construction stuff, forums to go to, and like all the beginner stuff that's really hard to figure out. And I just started working on amps, and I think that was a few years before. And then I decided to build some amps for some friends, and kind of started from there. And then I've lived in Portland and other places around Seattle.
Gotcha.
But yeah, that's basically how it got going.
And did you have a style of amplifier that you just liked sonically, or you like? I know when people get really nerdy about this stuff, sometimes it's like, oh, I just love how this company mounts their turret boards, and like,
Sure.
Did you have some inspirations as you dove into it?
Yeah, I would say at the beginning it was kind of a combination of what I already knew and liked, or actually kind of what I always played. My main amp that I always played was Marshall, just a JCM 800. And I had, to be honest, I wish I still had the amp so I could figure out what was going on with it. But when I had it in high school, it was always, now that I'm so familiar with that circuit and have played so many Marshalls now and stuff, that I realized the one I had was kind of a lemon. Something was wrong. Something was up with it. And I couldn't even tell you, without hearing it now but it was really, they're known as pretty bright amps.
Yeah.
This one was like crazy bright. And like there was something up with it. And I couldn't even tell you if maybe it was just the cab I had at the time. But so I kind of knew, I kind of started with like Marshalls. And at that time, like if you had a JCM 800, now those amps are, they were even iconic at the time, but now they're considered like, they're almost like rare, becoming rare and really expensive now.
Mm-hmm.
At the time they were, most bands use them. And so this was like, I'm 35, so I'm not that old, but this was like, I went to high school in the 2000s. A lot of people were using Marshall JCM 800s and Mesa rectifiers and stuff like that.
5150s.
5150s, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so, with the Marshall, so I really wanted to, I'd never even tried a plexi. And I figured, well, if I like an 800, a plexi's got to be better. It's just going to be even better because I've never heard it, and it's just going to sound exactly all the things I don't like about my 800. So the first amp I really built, like a big amp, was basically a 50-watt plexi.
Mm-hmm.
And I started with that, and then started modifying that, and that became my first amp, which was called the Fiction, actually. Like, it's
I like
kind of about it. Thank you. It's kind of about science fiction.
I know. I like it. I'm a fan.
But that was my first amp, and then that one actually became the Hellhawk. Once I don't know. I just decided to change the name and change it more, and that was kind of my first amp. Big amp was plexi inspired, and so yeah. Sorry, was that the question?
Sure, that works. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did that amp address all of your JCM 800 problems, or were you like,
not really? No.
What happened?
It didn't sound like I expected it to sound. It wasn't as gainy as I thought it'd be, as I thought it would be. So, but all these things led me to different modifications and experimenting with different things. So it was a really good learning thing. It wasn't as bright, that's for sure, but it was actually a bit too dark, at least the way that I had built it at first. And so, yeah, it was actually a pretty good platform for me. And most amps to the big amps are based off of Marshalls. So
right.
It was the perfect amp for me to experiment with.
Then Marshalls are based off of a basement, so it all comes back to somewhere.
They are. Yeah. But the plexi is almost a part for part of the Tweed Super Twin or the bass, or the JTM 45 is like the basement. Yeah.
Yeah. It's weird though, because I think in most guitar players' heads, we like, a lot of people know that to be true, but even me knowing that, I don't put them in the same sonic territory in my brain. I always think of Fender especially those models kind of being like more old school rock and roll tones. And then I think of Marshall, I think of AC/DC and things like that, Hendrix, and those don't sound the same,
Yeah.
And I wonder how much of that is the circuit itself and how much of that is the players that were using them at the time.
Yeah, I think it's both, and I think a huge part of it is the speakers. Because the Bassmans are 410 Jensen's open back, and that is such a huge difference.
Yeah.
And I would say it's that, and it's just like a lot of how we associate. Because another one is the Sun Model T.
Yeah.
And that amp, besides it has what's called an ultralinear power amp, which to be honest doesn't really affect the sound very much at all. Maybe when the power amp starts distorting, you could hear it under like with a recording it or something. But that preamp is also exactly the same, besides a couple little changes as a JGM 45 or a Bassman.
Really?
Same thing. And people really do not, except for it has a master volume, but people don't associate those at all with even, how the associations we have with Bassmans and Plexis and stuff.
Not at all. And I don't put the Model T in the Marshall territory either. That's really interesting. Wow.
It is funny too. It's like it was their most, well, now at least, popular of their vintage amps, It's the one that kind of stood the test of time, and it's funny because that's just that same circuit.
Right. I think a lot of it has to do with, the bands that ended up picking them up. And of course,
Totally.
like the Sun cabinets, we were talking about cabinets. Like I have this old Sun 2x12 that I just love. Everything I plug into it just gets so much, the bottom end gets tightened up. Like I can throw as low of tunings as I want at it. I've never tried a bass, but on guitar, I can throw as low tunings as I want at it and it'll handle it. And it just, everything's so much more forward and punchy with that cab. And it doesn't matter what amp I plug into it. It has that kind of response.
Cool. Does it have the original speakers in it?
It does. It's got the original Sun labeled like square magnet things. I don't know I haven't taken it apart in a long time. I don't remember if the magnets themselves are square or if it's the cover.
I'm not too familiar with those speakers. I've only ever used one of the ported 215s that came with the 200S or 2000S amps. And those had JBL, I think a D130, which is a pretty like sought after speaker. I know like Weber makes a version of it, and but I haven't really messed with the 212s, but that sounds cool. Yeah, I love that old stuff. Is it like a 60s or 70s one? Does it have a silver grill?
Exactly. Yeah, I'm guessing it's mid 70s. If I had to take a wild stab in the dark, I'm not sure. But now that we're saying this, it's reminding me that Conrad Sunholm lives.
He lives by you.
Lives like 15 minutes away. And I talked to him years ago about coming on the podcast, and it didn't really work out for whatever reason. But I'm like, wait a minute, I have to do that. Like, why have I not done that yet? It's
amazing he's around. It's just like, because to me he's like that. That's like interviewing Fender or something.
I know, like he's like the guy, and he's still making amps, and he's still like, I got to talk to him. I mean, I did interview Mike Mitchell from the Kingsmen, which remember, like a long time ago. He lived around here too, and we actually went into Cascade Cigar with my friend Jess and hung out with Mike Mitchell and smoked cigars and like just talked about rock and roll. It was a great episode. I don't know how many people have went back and listened to that, but he was talking about Conrad.
I was going to say my mentor, Dale, he grew up in a little town called Elma up the 101, and he from like Olympia. And he said the first time he ever noticed a tube amp was when he was in high school and the Kingsmen played his prom or homecoming.
Okay.
And it was he thinks it was like an early Model T. They were using it for bass. And that would have been one of the Sundholm brothers, or
Conrad, I think, was the circuit guy, and then I feel like his brother was in the band, and I believe
I think it was probably
bass.
his brother, unless Mike Mitchell played bass. I don't know.
No, he played guitar. So yeah. They had a lot of lineup changes over the year, but originally one of the Sundholm brothers was the bassist, and Mike was saying, he's like, we just needed more power. Like there was nothing on the market that could deliver what we were looking for, and so he had to make it himself, basically, and that's where Sun came from. Yeah, wild.
That's so cool.
I feel like Fender should really do something. They still own the brand. They should do something with it.
Yeah, I think I don't know if the last thing they did was that reissue, which that reissue is not anything like the old one. And same with Orange, they're pretty much only the same in the name. I think Orange has made some reissues of old amps, but most of their amps are like modded high gain stuff or actually based off Voxes or Fenders and stuff.
Right.
So like the Rock Reverb, that one's the closest to like an Angle Powerball or something. And a lot of people play. It's a lot of it is psychological because you see the way it looks and you go, oh, that's the Sun sound, but it's like, no, it's actually the Marshall sound.
Right.
But those amps are cool. They're definitely, all these amps I'm talking about are cool in their own way, but they're it's just funny because they could definitely reissue a Model T for sure. I'm sure people would be into it.
So going back a little bit, you were talking about the ultralinear transformers. So
sure.
Maybe you can explain a little bit of what that means to the audience, because I kind of know. I have a Fender 75 that has one, and I always heard how terrible they sounded, and I was always confused because I'm like, this sounds pretty good to me. So what is it that people think they don't like about them?
I honestly have no idea. I think it's just a thing that started because it's basically something that's borrowed from the hi-fi world. Mm-hmm. To get a more linear response out of the power tubes, and I haven't played with it very much, but it requires a different kind of output transformer, and it's a different way of connecting the output tubes, and I think it's just supposed to give like more headroom and more linear response until clipping, and so I think that the idea is that because Dr. Z uses it, and in an amp that is not designed as a totally clean amp. And I think when they came out, I can't remember which model it is, when they came out with that amp, it kind of exploded some of the myths about like ultralinear is bad. But I think the idea was that, it's to make the amp operate more clean or cleanly. And, guitar amps, we like overdrive and distortion. So therefore, it's a bad thing in a guitar amp, but crank up a Model T. Does it sound bad? Can you hear the ultralinearness of it? It's really, I couldn't even tell you where that really started. I think it's just the association with hi-fi, and that's why Sun did it. I mean, when they started, they were modifying Dynaco kits. They were buying kit amps and modifying those. And so the Sun, as far as I can tell, is like a 150 watt Dynaco style power amp. And they were even using those transformers, and then they basically just attached the Fender Bassman front end to it. Mm-hmm. And that was that. Put a master volume between them, which was actually kind of novel for the time. I mean, Hiwatt had them and Trainer had them, but it's not a very good master volume either. It doesn't let the amp get, you can't really get very much gain with it turned down, but it works. There's something to control the volume.
It's funny to see too, like something that was, like you said, Hiwatt and Trainer. You don't see a lot of Hiwatt and Trainer amps floating around the Pacific Northwest, especially not at the time. So it makes you wonder if they did kind of just come up with that idea, independently.
Yeah, I'm not sure. You'll have to ask Conrad.
I will.
I'll be listening closely to see what he says.
Yeah, it's weird how some certain types of gear gets a little bit pocketed away, like we don't see a lot of vintage orange stuff over here either, which is why when I saw this cab that my friend Hank had recently, I immediately I was like, I have to have this because it's like early 70s orange cab with 68 creambacks in it, and it's in like flawless condition, and it just got like rat holed away in a basement in Portland for some reason, and I'm thinking like, how did this even get here? And then how did it get here, and how did it just stay? It has the amp cover or the cabinet cover and everything.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah,
it just stayed in this person's basement. Like, it's weird how this stuff travels and gets pushed around. My son, I inherited from somebody who was just like, I don't know what to do with this. I was like, I'll take it. I don't know what there's, but by that same token, around here, you do see a lot of old son gear just kind of at garage sales and knocking around. Not as much as you used to, but that's where I first heard of the brand, was just seeing it randomly and going, I wonder what that is.
Yeah, there used to be a lot, especially in Oregon, floating around. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you're making amps now, let's talk about your lineup and what kind of goes into each one. So you mentioned the Hellhawk earlier.
Yeah,
and are you still doing the fiction?
That one's changed over the years, but that's my oldest model. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so let's go through the range. Tell me about them.
Sure. That one. Well, and I hopefully this year I can come out with a couple new things. I've just been so busy fulfilling orders, and man, I love to design amps, and I just have not been able to find the time. I thought I'd get less busy during the pandemic, but I got more busy. So, the Hellhawk, that one, I would say that one's kind of like my ultimate Marshall kind of thing. Mm-hmm. It can go from like 67 plexi to super high gain hot rodded, and it still keeps like the Marshall voice. It's maybe that's how I describe that one. It's 2 channels. It has a shared EQ. I tried to basically make it 2 channels but keep it as simple as possible. So the first channel I would say is in the plexi range, and then or even like a Sun Model T, and then it basically just goes from there. And then I have another model, the Decolonizer, and that one's actually, those amps became pretty similar. I think I'm probably going to discontinue one and do something else because they've kind of like merged closely. But the Decolonizer is kind of, I describe it, it's kind of like a little bit more of the deluxe version in that the clean channel has a separate EQ and the overdrive channel has a foot switchable boost. So it kind of acts like a 2.5 channel amp. So you can have like a clean or a dirty clean, a kind of crunch sound, and then like a super high gain sound just from the amp. And that one's voiced pretty similarly. It's maybe like a little bit tighter and more aggressive for certain like more modern, well, not even necessarily modern, but like just different styles of metal and stuff.
Yeah.
The Earthling is my amp that is, and all of these amps I make in 50, 100, or 200 watts. So you can get them in whatever power level you want. It didn't used to be that way, but in 2017 I started making it so you could get any of the models in any power level. The Earthling is my amp that's based off of Mad Amp GT120, which is another kind of like legendary amp that's very rare, more rare than a Model T, probably in the United States. And that one I make in a single or 2 channel. The single channel one is pretty true to the original. I was lucky to have my friends in my shop for like, he let me borrow it for like a couple of years. I had also a friend's Model T for a long time too. I have friends that are really nice and don't use their vintage amps too much. So I'm really obsessed with like A-Bing amps. I have all kinds of like elaborate setups to A-B amps in real time. So and I basically I have a single channel version which is pretty true to the original, except for it has a master volume that works real good to let you turn the thing down, because those are some of the loudest amps, and they get really loud really fast. And I've made some tweaks to the circuit, of course, and then the 2-channel one is kind of weird, because it's, instead of having like a clean and an overdrive channel, that amp, for a vintage amp, especially with the type of master volume that's in it that allows the power amp to break up, they have a pretty good range from clean to overdrive, and it's almost like a, if you've heard it, it's kind of it's a very mid-focused kind of, almost more, it can be more fuzzy kind of overdrive. So what I decided to do on the 2-channel version is to make 2 channels of two identical channels. So the idea is, because the 1 channel has so much range, I figured, well, I can just make 2 of the same channel. And then the idea is like, it's almost as if you had 2 Mad amps behind you, and you could A/B between 2 vintage amps with just different settings. And I thought of like Neil Young, how he's famous for like, he uses, he uses a lot of stuff, but like his main amp is the 5E3, Tweed 5E3. And I know his tech built like a motorized thing that clamps onto the knobs. Have you heard about this?
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah,
it's like called it has a funny name, like Merlin
Gizmotron or something. Yeah.
And it and basically he hits a button and it has these like, activates these like, I don't know what a servo motor is, but I've heard that it's like these servo motors, and they literally turn the knob so he can have his cleaner and his overdrive sound in that same amp, because of course he has a million Tweed amps, but he's like into this one. So he's like, I just want the sound of it turned up. So they created that. So this is kind of a similar idea where you have 2 different, each channel has its own master volume, its own gain control. There is a shared EQ, but then each one has its own rotary, kind of like high and low end filter. And so you can voice them differently. And so yeah, I make that in the single or this dual channel version. What else have I got? The Street Sweeper, that's kind of like my Fender-y or like clean side of a Dumble kind of amp. I've been making that one for a long time too. It has some different voicing options, and its kind of special feature is it has 2 reverbs you can switch between.
Oh, cool.
So you can, it's kind of elaborate. I've noticed with like, I started making that amp, I would say before, pedals have always been popular, but like before like the extreme pedal boom, and maybe before spring reverb emulation got good. Which some people might argue that it's still not the same. I might be one of those people, but basically, the reverb has a level and like I call it a color control. It's like a tone control for the reverb, similar to the 6G15 reverb units. Have you seen those? The reverb units that sit on top of the amp.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's similar. It's similar to that, but with the foot switch, you can turn the reverb on and off, or you can switch between 2 different reverb tone settings in the amp.
Is it all still in the same tank and everything, or do you have 2 different reverb tanks?
Yeah, that's a common question. Yeah, it's the same tank, and you're just switching between the controls, basically.
Got it.
Yeah, and so you can have like a subtle and a more extreme reverb setting, or a bright and a dark one, instead of having to use a pedal for like a second setting.
Yeah.
And then my most popular amp is this amp called the Mother, and that one's high watt influenced. That one I've been making that one since like 2013, I think, or 2012. And I'm on like the Mark III version. And that one I also make in a single or a dual channel version. The single channel is basically just the clean channel. And that one's kind of like, I kind of advertise, that one works real well for guitar or bass. And the single channel one's kind of like more of a pedal platform. It does get some crunch, but not a lot. And it's just a versatile, just clean amp. And then the other amp, the overdrive channel is kind of unique because it can actually get pretty clean too, but it can get really high gain. It can even do, like, I play in a death metal band, and we used it on our record.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it can do like type metal, or you can play clean bass. I think that's probably why it's my most versatile amp. It's like, or my most popular probably, because it's the most versatile, I would say.
Right.
Yeah.
And then again, 50 to 200 watts. So like.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's super cool. Yeah. Thank you for the rundown. Cause I was I was just like looking at all of them going like,
They all look the same. They've all got treble controls. Yeah. Sometimes I see pedal companies and they like make each kind of pedal have its own different look, which is easier in a pedal, but I'm like, and then I think about my amps. I'm like, this is probably confusing if you're looking at these for the first time.
a little bit.
You can always email me and ask.
Yeah,
so.
That's right. You're around. Easy to get a hold of. Yeah. But I did want to ask you, speaking of the look though, I think the look, we as players want to say that like we don't care about that stuff, but ultimately we hear with our eyes half the time.
Yeah.
And your look is what drew me in the first place. I was just like, wow, this is a beautiful looking amplifier. I love how it looks. How long did it take you to come up with that vibe?
Not super long. I'm trying to remember what it was like at the beginning. And I actually originally started the company with a friend of mine, and we kind of came up with it together. I liked the look. I know I liked the look of old Marshalls and how they had some, like the front of the head cabinet has some little, I always call them wings. They're not wings, but the part that goes like over the side of the chassis doesn't go all the way to the end of the amp. I knew I wanted that. I knew, I think for the large logo, with the wide letter spacing, I think I was probably looking at an old Magnatone maybe, or Matchless or something.
Mm-hmm.
And what else was I into? And then high watts. I like the simplicity of the high watts. They're kind of minimal, but they have a look. So I think I was kind of going for a future retro look. There's something, it like obviously my amps have a pretty classic look, but they also are maybe more even minimal than some older stuff, and that they don't have piping and there's no gold or anything. But yeah, I would say that was the like main inspiration. My old amps too, the original heads are big. They're big. At the time I didn't think they were very big, but they are big. They're like as long as like a JC, because I always played a JCM 800. Those amps are really long. They span the whole cab.
Yeah.
And my old heads are a little bit shorter, but they're deeper. It's funny. When I see them now, I'm like, what was I thinking? These things are just gigantic. They're still pretty big, but they're not that big. Yeah.
Every time I pick up my PV Windsor head and like look in the back of it, I'm like, why is this head so tall and huge?
Right.
Like it's weird how I got that thing, but like, yeah, those are, to my understanding, essentially a JCM 800.
Yeah, there's something
as far as
like
I'm
that.
aware.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm looking at like how much room is in there, and I'm just like, wow, like Hartley, you really killed a lot of trees for no reason.
Yeah, the other one, the era of like the VTMs and the Butchers and stuff are famous too because they're really heavy. And if you take one out of the cabinet, it's just the. Oh, you know what's funny? I listened to the interview you did with Andy Fuchs.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And he literally, I think he mentioned this too, because it's just so funny that those PVs, they're just like the head cabinet. It's made out of MDF, and it's like it literally weighs as much or more than the actual amp. I couldn't believe it. I think every amp tech or whatever remembers the first time they took out a PV. They're like, "What?" The chassis is kind of thin, and like it's just the head box. But
right, it's like they're tricking you. Like if we make it heavy, people will think it's high quality. Like
right, and I still meet players that are they don't like, and I mean, I think everyone has their limit of, I don't know about you, but I always get kind of a weird feeling when I see a tiny little Class D amp on top of like a Ampeg 810.
Yeah.
It just doesn't really look, it's just not proportionate.
I'd almost rather
almost put it on the side
not
or
see
something.
it. Yeah, put it behind it. Like, I don't want to look at it. I'd rather just see the cabinet there. I know why you do it. I get it. It practically makes sense. But yeah, you're right. I mean, even things like a friend of mine has like a bass terror on an Ampeg like refrigerator cab, and I'm just like, no, we need to be bigger.
I don't think it's like a weird. I heard this phrase? It was like petrol masculinity or something. It was about like the idea of associating like gas guzzling trucks and motorcycles with like being a man or something, and like how, you know, people should try to break that association because it's obviously just like an invented thing. You know, using gas doesn't make you a man, and just having a big amp, it's the same thing. So I hope that's not where that's coming from. I think for me, it's just literally like a visual. It's more of an aesthetic thing. I don't care about like big amps. Like, even though I make big amps, I don't care about it. I think it's just like the look of it bothers me on like an aesthetic level.
Yeah.
So I totally get that about wanting an amp that's not micro, you know.
But by the same token, it has to be that, because it has to be an aesthetic thing primarily, because like a small combo amp doesn't bother me. It looks like what it's supposed to be there,
totally.
you know?
Yeah, totally. Same. It's just like a proportionate thing. So, yeah, now my amps are a little bit smaller, and they're like about the size of like a high watt, or actually a Model T is about the same size. So I also kind of like the look when the head is a little smaller than the cab, has a little shoulder.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's getting picky, but you know, I definitely I design amps, so I think about this stuff a lot, you know.
I think people don't realize the depths of nerdery. Like, as nerdy as guitar players get about their own gear, when you start making gear, the depths that you go to the point where you're like, okay, like for us at Stringjoy, it's like, okay, like how many months did we spend doing the rebrand and like thinking about how that impacted the boxes, and like how we were gonna make the labels fit, and how they were gonna fold together, and when they're all stacked up on a shelf, what do they look like? It's like the level of nerdery you can get to with any kind of brand or product can go really deep. But I think when you put the time in, it shows. And I think that's probably why we're talking today, because like I said, your amps were just like, I'm like, wow, those are beautiful. Like,
yeah, thanks. I think I'm grateful that I spent a lot of time working on it, because, you know, it's definitely gotten people curious about my amps and stuff. So
yeah. Well, if I think about Orange as a brand, right? Like, I didn't know they existed when I first started playing guitar, and I would guess that most guys our age didn't either. And all of a sudden, that, you know, every hardcore band was playing them, you know, on stage at various festivals and the Warped Tour, and all the punk bands were playing it, and all of a sudden it was like everyone was literally going, "What are those orange amps up there?"
Right.
You know, you could make the argument that their aesthetic essentially rebirthed that entire brand by nature of just being different and cool looking, you know, to some people.
Totally. Like I was saying, the fact that they can make completely new amp designs and keep the look. And yeah, I mean, that's a good example. I mean, and it's kind of I would say most guitar players, because appreciate. I wonder about this sometimes, like even like a Marshall. Like I'm like, if I saw a Marshall today and it never had existed before, would I like it? I don't know. I don't really like gold on amps.
Right.
But it's like when I see a Marshall, I'm like, oh yeah, like an old one. I'm like, that's just the best. But it's hard to part and parcel, like, and not that it matters, but like what is just, you know, it's the same with guitar tone. I mean, this conversation comes up a lot with tube amps especially. And it's the reason why a lot of tube amps draw from classic designs. It's like I could design an amp from scratch. I could totally do that, and I could voice it by ear, but I bet you what I would come up with would be still pretty close to some iconic sound, because there's different ways to get to the same sound.
Yeah.
For example, like my mother amp, the dual channel version, the high gain channel, I can get it to sound almost. I actually did a video, just like in my story the other day, about it was like comparing to a Marshall JMP, and I couldn't tell the difference between them. And one's like a hot rodded high watt, and the other one's a Marshall. And on paper, they look totally different, but you could get them to sound virtually identical, even with like fairly similar settings. And, was who designed high watts? Dave Reeves. Did him and Leo Fender or Marshall, were they like all thinking, like were they copying each other? And they just were, there's a point where there's just too much treble, or there's
right.
to this or to that. And everyone kind of, all those amps do have a different tone, but they're more similar than they are different, I would say. And there's some amps that are really quite different in their overall tone and response, like the Vintage Orange or something. It's very flat in the mid-range, but it could be, but in general, players, especially today, way more than back then when like rock music was just being created for the first time, we're so used to hearing certain sounds that I found that guitar players like are as experimental as they get with pedals. People, when it comes to amps, are pretty conservative.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, because it's kind of like the amp's too bright, it's too dark, it's too this, it's too that. Like a lot of people have the similar idea of like what's acceptable like guitar tone when you just plug straight into an amp.
Yeah.
But with pedals, it's like whatever.
Yeah, that's right. We're gonna put
cool.
a bit crusher on the tail of this reverb. Why not?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder if that's because, like, as a guitar, like, even when you get into extended tunings and things like that, guitar is primarily a mid-range instrument. It occupies a lot of the same range that a vocalist does. And I think guitarists probably, as a baseline, we, even if we're not thinking in those terms, we kind of know that from playing for so long.
Yeah.
And so anything that kind of falls too far outside of that spectrum, especially getting on the high end, getting a little too shrill, for me anyway, that's when I start going, no, this isn't it. I can deal with maybe a little bit too much low end, but if it starts getting ice picky, I'm just like, not interested.
Yeah, I found like regardless of genre, people have similar ideas of like tonally what is good and bad. It actually surprises me sometimes. But it also totally depends on the context, but especially within a certain thing. So it's good for me because I can I would say I don't make amps like for a specific genre of music. I like all kinds of music. So sometimes I kind of wish that some of my amps, I could just stick to one thing. But I really like the idea of versatile equipment. I always have. That was, I think, one of my design goals from the beginning, was to make amps that could be used for different styles of music, not just like because I could just make a straight up like metal amp.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure. I'm sure if I made just the most brutal, evil, awesome, perfect metal amp, I would probably be tempted to be like, well, what if I could just get the clean sound just a little bit more like this or that? Well, maybe I could actually get some like tweed sounds in there if I change this. That's kind of always how it goes. Which is why I don't make any straight up clones of amps or anything.
Right.
Even with the Earthling, I'd say that one is closest to a vintage amp, like to the Mad amp. But even in that amp, I've done a lot to make it more versatile, because those old ones are pretty frustrating. And it's different too. Like I've noticed like vintage amps, you can get away, they get away with a lot more because they're cool old amps. I don't have the luxury of like the, even if your Mad amp is like frustrating the hell out of you, you just look back at it and you're like, oh yeah, that thing's so cool. Like it can do no wrong.
Yeah, like you don't have the nostalgia and the mojo working for you quite in the same way as
exactly. Maybe like one day I will. One day. But yeah, so I have to try really hard to make sure the amps, they're dead. There's no noise at all. The taper of the controls works just as you would expect it to work. There's stuff like that. So that's a lot of my design work is making sure the amps can do like the vintage sounds, but also, people have pretty high expectations these days of gear. And
yeah,
it's funny sometimes because I'm like, man, I get these amps dead quiet, but you plug in a single coil pickup. It's just like, it's just, okay. It's like people will tolerate all the noise of a Strat pickup or something, but they, with an amp, it has to be like dead silent. And I wouldn't design noisy amps. I'm just too OCD. I couldn't do it, but it is just funny how people are willing to accept certain things,
Noise is always a funny one for me because I've discovered that I am fairly noise tolerant.
Yeah.
Like because I'm like, I don't know. I'm always playing with a lot of fuzz, pretty dirty, like not all the time, but fairly often. And I just know that when you do that, you're gonna have some noise, or you got to put a gate on it, and then you're gonna lose some sustain. That's just reality. That's just you can't have crazy high gain, no gate, and expect it to be dead silent. It's just physics.
Yeah, that's kind of metal players know this. Everyone I know that plays extreme metal, unless they're going for actually like noise as part of the sound of the band, everyone uses a noise gate. It also it's kind of part of the sound, because it can make it more percussive and stuff. So it's interesting how actually a noise gates become part of the tone of most metal. But I think people use high gain definitely are in agreement with you, and they know what to expect. But yeah, just more little buzzes and hums. And sometimes though I play amps and I'm like, man, people are okay with this.
Yeah,
most people don't notice. Yeah,
it's weird though. Like the amount of times where pedal builder friends of mine will send me emails that they get, and they're like, I plugged this compressor in with my Strat, and now my amp's really noisy. What's wrong with your pedal? And it's like, I mean, it's a compressor. It makes the thing. Yeah, it's gonna bring up the quiet sounds. That's what it does. And some of it's just lack of education, but the people just literally not knowing what they're buying sometimes, and then accusing the builder of making something that's crap when it's actually doing exactly what it's supposed to do. You just don't know how to use it.
Yeah, it's hard to these days, but there's so people's pedal boards are so elaborate. There's so much different gear interfacing.
Yeah.
That it's hard because you have to try to make, when I design effects loops, I have to try to make them work with all different kinds of ways people might use an effects loop, because it's not just, you used to just put a reverb or a delay, and that, back in the days, they used to just make everything line level for rack equipment. Now everyone puts pedals, so that's an obvious thing. You make it pedal friendly, but a lot of people use effects loops as power amp returns with preamps or digital modeling stuff, or they use 4-cable method with this and that. And it's just a lot to design around, because there's just so many. It's really cool though, because you can, if you have a problem these days, a practical problem, there's some way to fix it.
Right. You can get around it somehow.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. It is interesting though, how many people will have some sort of elaborate setup, throw a new piece of gear at it, and then say, oh, this new piece of gear that I threw at it is the problem because it never used to do this before.
Right.
When it actually might be just the way it's interacting with other things.
Yeah.
And that particular pedal is fine. It's just you weren't expecting it to cause something to feed back because of your crazy routing. And some people are a little quick to blame the unit rather than the setup.
Yeah.
that gets a little irritating sometimes.
Yeah, I think a lot of players are becoming so knowledgeable at the same time, like about this stuff that sometimes I'm so impressed by like my customers. They're like when their questions they ask me, I'm like, wow, you know a lot about this stuff. It's pretty, and I think YouTube and stuff and there's so much like education around like gear and stuff these days that it's pretty cool because I think people are able to problem solve better and find out like what they actually need, and it's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool time for sure to be into gear and stuff. I'm always finding new things, even though I just make amps, I play in bands that use big pedal boards and stuff, and I'm always like, messing around with different stuff. So
yeah, it's a fun world. Like I've said this for years, but there's never been a better time to be an electric guitar player than right now.
Yeah.
Like,
well, except for the used prices on equipment.
Well, yeah, that's a bit of a newer development.
And the tube shortage.
the tube shortage. Oh man,
everyone bought all the tubes. Remember, it was like toilet paper.
It seems like that's calming down a little bit. Like people are realizing, no, okay, there are tubes, and tubes.
There's no choice. There's no tubes to buy.
Right.
I have some. I hope I can get more. It's a problem for sure. I mean, there's gonna be more tubes. Tubes aren't gonna go away. But it was just funny because on YouTube there was all these YouTubers with really clickbaity things, and they were actually the ones I watched. They were like being responsible about it, but it like totally backfired because everyone would say, it seems like this will blow over or whatever. So don't everyone go out there and buy tubes, but you might want an extra set of tubes. I mean, I bought an extra set. I mean, don't go out there and buy all the tubes, but so if 1 million people watch those videos,
yeah,
and everybody buys a set of tubes, all the tubes are gone overnight. I mean, they're literally gone overnight. It's crazy.
Well, not to mention, and I did get some confirmation on this later. It's like it wasn't just the consumers that went crazy, and it wasn't just the small amp builders that went crazy. There were some of the very large amp companies trying to hit up anybody and everyone they could, to put in like massive tube orders. Yeah. I don't know that any of them were successful. At least the distributors that I have connections to were like, listen, we'll sell you some, but we're not going to screw over the rest of our customer base. Right.
One thing I haven't heard about and is that, the industry standard for guitar cabinets and head boxes is Baltic birch plywood.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And Baltic birch plywood, 90% of it, I think 10% of it maybe comes from Finland, but 90% of it comes from Russia. Mm-hmm. And unlike the tube thing where it turned out there wasn't actually an export ban on it after all, there is definitely an export ban, as far as I know, on lumber.
Birch. Yeah.
And so I definitely bought an insane amount of that because I freaked out and I was like, oh no, Baltic birch, it comes from Russia. I better get some. So I have enough Baltic birch to build a lot of cabinets, but after that, I don't know. Who knows what will happen? May have to switch to something else, a different type of plywood, pine plywood or something. But I figured I don't want to have to solve that problem right now. The tube thing's enough. So I'm good friends, as the entire podcast listener base knows, with Chris Benson. So we talked about. Oh yeah, I just met him for the first time the other day. I think he had like apprenticed for Ben Verellen in Seattle.
Yes.
Years ago when he started, or he worked for him or whatever. And Ben had a little amp show. Ben's like now like retired, at least for now.
That's what he says.
But he has a really cool. Well, I think part of the reason is he's in a band that is busy, and he also has this really cool bar. I don't know if you've ever been there, Bar House.
I've heard about it, but I've never been.
Yeah, and they have shows there, and it's really nice place. And he's been running that place, and in his shop is also there, and he has like a wood shop across the alley and stuff. It's really cool, but he had a little like amp gear swap thing, and I went, and he invited me to show my stuff there, and Chris Benson was there, so
nice.
I got to meet him for the first time, so that was cool. But anyways, what was he telling you about?
Well, we were just talking about this very same thing, and I didn't even think until somebody else mentioned it, the Baltic birch thing. I was like, oh yeah, that's a problem, and then I remembered, like, wait a minute, Benson uses pine. I kind of forgot that he used, like, that's why I was trying to think, like, why did Chris never bring up the birch thing?
Yeah.
We were talking about tubes for like 3 hours, and then it was like dawned on me, like, he's not even thinking about it. He's always used pine.
Yeah, pine.
He uses pine on purpose. Yeah.
Yeah, the solid pine is like a Fender thing, and it's real nice for smaller stuff.
Yep.
Especially combo cabs. Yeah, all the big stuff is Baltic birch, so it's hard. I think there's a couple of companies that maybe use. I don't know. I think everyone uses Baltic birch. It's crazy.
That's all I can think of. I've never heard anybody advertise anything other than Baltic birch or pine.
Victory Amps uses, and they used to be. Have you heard of Victory, the British company?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. They have the original company was called Cornford, and
okay.
Yeah, Martin Kidd. He's the same designer, and they used pine. I don't know. And now when I was thinking about this, I was like, was there any other companies? And I found Victory they still use birch for like the baffle board and backboard of the amp, but I think they use something else for the outside, like some kind of like pine plywood or something. So I don't know. I might have to look into that.
Yeah, it's definitely something. I mean, with guitars too, we have gotten used to having certain materials, right? And now they're saying, like, Fender, I think, started to phase out swamp ash a few years ago. And now more and more companies are having to stop using swamp ash, just because they're just having a hard time getting it, And so I think we as guitar players have to kind of prepare for materials to shift and evolve over time. And I think, I'm personally not too worried about it as a player. Like, companies are going to put out largely good stuff. Nobody wants to put out trash. So if it's a different wood that you end up having to use, I think it'll probably still sound good, because I trust that you're not going to put out any garbage. So, I'm not
it's less
too
important
concerned
with cabs too, especially like big sealed cabs. The main reason to use Baltic birch is it doesn't warp. It's high, you can get it with a really nice surface if you want to stain it. Although birch is not a good wood to stain. It's very difficult to get an even stain. But, the reasons that they use it, it's more structural than tonal. I mean, obviously for a head cabinet, it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect the sound. At least I haven't met anybody who said that, has claimed
it affects the tone.
Yeah.
The tone is in the head cab.
Well, I remember back in the day, if you've heard of the famous Trainwreck amps, Ken Fisher, he used to kind of like troll people, I guess, or early trolling. He would say that like red wire sounded different because he would just make stuff up. And I mean, there's a lot of people that don't think he was joking, but I think he was 100% joking about like the color of the wire changing, the slew rate of he was just like saying stuff, messing around. But he definitely was very particular about sound and the way that the amps were constructed and everything. But I don't know. I feel like Dumble used to say stuff like that too. But,
right. You got to align the crystal lattice.
Yeah, there's something about the crystal lattice. I don't know. I'll have to find where he originally said something about that. But
I believe it was actually in a video.
yeah.
If I remember correctly, I feel like my brain may be playing tricks on me, but I feel like I saw him say that in a video somewhere.
And he used to buy parts from Radio Shack.
I know.
What does he care? They don't sell crystal. I don't know what the hell he's talking about.
Yeah, the Dumble stories that Andy told on the Patreon section. I was just like, wow, he was a much more interesting individual than I realized. Like,
yeah, I've heard some weird stuff down there. Like, originally I heard that I don't know if he mentioned this, but I remember a long time ago, I heard he quit making amps and then he was making like rifles or something. Like he was designing. I have no idea. He got into something. He got into something else that was equally as nerdy, but it was just like a totally different thing when he stopped making. I don't know if he ever really stopped making amps, but when he kind of semi-retired, he got into some other geeky stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm just repeating what Andy said. I don't have anything. I believe Andy, but obviously this is just coming from one guy. But yeah, I guess he was like living off the grid and
okay, that's probably what I'm thinking of. Yeah,
yeah, and he was a sovereign citizen and all this other stuff. Like he was a quite interesting individual. A lot of stuff that I had never heard before, and it's too long to go into. But
totally, I'll have to check it out. That's crazy.
We talked about it for like a half hour, and I was just like, "This is crazy." I had no idea. And Andy, had some weird interactions with him, and admittedly, like Andy, was kind of trolling him a little bit. That's not the words he used, but that's kind of what was going on.
Right.
So they had a little bit of a high friction relationship as well. So it was entertaining though to hear Andy's side of it.
Interesting. Yeah, I'll have to check that out. It's kind of fascinating.
Well, I just realized what time it was. This kind of flew by on me, and I still have.
I'm a chatterbox for sure.
Well, that's perfect. The podcast gets weird when you stop talking. That's when it gets awkward.
Yeah.
So before we get into the classic questions and wrap this thing up, this is the point where I like to give the guests a chance to plug anything they want to plug, shout out their grandma, anybody you want to thank, anybody you want to, give a shout out to, and to a couple thousand people. Now's a good time to do it.
Yeah, I would say if you have any questions about my stuff, you can always email me and follow me on Instagram. I would love to have, it doesn't matter, but I'd love to have 10,000 followers by my birthday in June. That would be cool. So if you don't follow me on Instagram, that would be awesome. I really hope to have some new stuff this year. We didn't get really a chance to talk about it, but I'm working on something pretty exciting with John from Electronic Audio Experiments. So I know you've had on here.
My boy. Yeah, love John.
We're working on a pedal that's like based off one of my amps. So I just got the prototype for that this week, and so we're tweaking that. And I don't know exactly when that'll be ready, but that's pretty cool because I've never done a pedal before, and yeah. And so he's a buddy, and so thanks to John.
Yeah.
Thanks to my girlfriend who I live with in my home shop, and she's very tolerant of all the amp racket that I make all the time. Although amp building, besides when you're testing, is a fairly quiet activity. Yeah, that's just about it, really. I don't really have anything, new products to plug or anything. I'm just trying to catch up on orders and stuff. So thanks to all my customers for being really patient. I appreciate it.
Nice. That's exciting. Yeah. John's the one to do a pedal with if you're going to do a pedal. The guy
He's
really smart.
Deal.
Yeah, I love that dude. He's fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. So, classic questions before we wrap this thing up. First one.
Okay.
What's your favorite Boss pedal?
Oh, okay. Just one. I love Boss pedals. And there was a time when Boss was not very cool. I remember it was only cool to have like a TU2 and a metal zone. But now I'm a huge Boss freak. I'm looking down at my pedal board. Oh, I really like the DD500.
Oh,
It's not
yeah,
a
that thing looks
classic
cool.
Boss pedal. It's a newer Boss pedal. But if you are into tweaking stuff and you've tried a million delays and every delay you've tried has I wish it could do this, I wish it could do that. The DD500, you can make it do anything. It's crazy. And the way I use it a lot is sometimes I set the delay time to 1 millisecond. It's like the shortest it can be. And then, so basically it's not a delay. You can just use like, if you have, it has like a slicer delay based off the slicer pedal, and if you turn the delay all the way down, it's just a slicer.
Nice.
So you've got a slicer or whatever. So I use it like a flanger. I use it kind of to do that like eventide micro pitch thing where it's like kind of flangey doubled sound. It sounds kind of like you hear on old post-punk recordings when they double the guitar, and you can just do so much crazy stuff with it. But yeah, I love a lot of Boss pedals. So I like. I was just messing around with their line selector pedal. I had a new appreciation for the line selector.
Yeah.
It's a utility pedal, but it's like, man, they make so many gadgets like that. People are still coming out with gadgets like that. And the line selector, for when it came out and how well it works, it's so cool. And you can use it to solve so many like modern, like we were talking about, pedal board problems.
Mm-hmm.
And blending parallel pedals in parallel, or blending a clean signal with your overdrive or whatever. You can just do so much cool stuff with it, and it's compact. I don't know. Yeah, I could talk a lot about Boss pedals. I also love Boss pedals.
I love them too. I got one right here.
Yeah.
There's one over there. There's one over there. Yeah. That's why it's a question. Yeah, my big supporter and moderator in the Tone Mob group, Jason Fuzzmonger, suggested that years ago, and it's been a fun question to add in at the end of every episode. So
cool.
Yeah, good stuff. And it's awesome because there's like they have such a history and they have so many weird things that people don't think about. Or the line selector is like a classic one that's like I didn't realize how cool it was till somebody brought it up on the show. They're like, "Oh, the line selector. You never played one." I hadn't at the time. And then I was like, "Oh man, that is an awesome pedal. Wow. How ahead of their time they were with everything, it seems."
Yeah. The way that I used to use it with my JCM 800 was that I would set the amp dirty and then not super, I mean, they don't get super high gain anyways, but then for a clean sound, I realized with the pedal you can just use one cable in and one cable out, and there's two little volume controls, and you can use you can just switch between the two volume controls. So I would set one cleaner as like a volume cut.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to do that with the volume pedal, and I used to stack washers for like a minimum volume.
Oh,
so
yeah.
You've probably seen people do that. But the problem with those, is I didn't know at the time about buffers, but, they weren't buffered. So when I tried to clean up the signal, it would get dark. But I didn't have that problem with the Boss because it was buffered. And then you can even use the other volume control to boost the front end of the amp. So in like one pedal, you can have a volume cut and a clean boost and with a buffer. And it's just like one of the million things you can do with it. But you're kind of only limited by your creativity with those kind of pedals.
Definitely.
Yeah.
All right. Final question.
Okay.
This is the one that gets a little bit dicey, a little bit weird. What is your favorite kind of pizza?
Oh, shit. Oh, okay. I got a good one. Okay. I'm originally from New Mexico.
Okay.
And so the big thing in New Mexico is green chili. And a lot of people, and Portland actually, green chili has, I'm going to give a shout out to Pepper Box. Have you ever been there?
Pepper Box is great. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a New Mexican restaurant. That guy's from New Mexico. It's legit. Like that is legit New Mexican food. And so green chili, it's like a roasted pepper. It's not that different from an Anaheim or something, but it's a little bit spicier, and it's a roasted pepper, and they use it in everything in New Mexico. And so one thing that they do with it is put it on pizza. So you can have green chili cheese pizza. So that's probably my favorite pizza.
That sounds
just
really
green chili
good.
and cheese. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, it's not that different from having some kind of like roasted peppers, but it's just like green chili is kind of a special thing. So I would say green chili cheese pizza.
Okay. Green chili and cheese. I like it. You made my brain just kind of melt for a second when you mentioned Pepper Box, because I've been there several times and I really like it. But I realized the last time I'd been there was in 2020 with my friend Jess. We were there like literally like a week before lockdown. And we were, and the reason it stands out so much to me is because we were there eating lunch after the Stomp Box Deli came and did a thing in Portland. And so we were there hanging out with all the Portland pedal people, crammed into this little tiny, like really it should have been in a bigger venue. It was very small. There was probably like 2,500 people that came in and out of that place. They were literally like having to stop people at the door. No. Like... Well, so the pedal expo was like kitty corner to Pepper Box. It was at that place called Holocene.
I remember that place. It was a venue. Yeah, I don't know if it still is. Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's still there or not, but we were all crammed in there, and there was like 2,500 people in and out.
Yeah.
And so it's just this weird memory I have because it was like the last event I went to before lockdown.
Oh, interesting.
And Pepper Box was where we ate afterwards. So weird.
Yeah. It's a good
weird tangent.
I hope they're still open.
Yeah, I'll have to look. I'm not sure if Holocene made it or not. I think Pepper Box did though, so that's good.
Oh yeah, Pepper Box. I don't care about Holocene. Pepper Box though. If they closed, I'm going to be real sad.
I think they're still open. I feel like I drove by there recently and it looked like it was open. So
good.
Fingers crossed.
Good. Yeah.
Well, dude, this was a lot of fun. Thank you for hanging out with me.
Yeah. Thanks for
educating
asking
me on your stuff.
Yeah. My pleasure.
Now's probably a good time to slide over to Patreon.
Okay, cool. All right. Thanks, everybody. And see you in the next one.
All right, everybody. For Alex, this is Blake. And as always, folks, good luck and good tones. All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I did. Alex is a great dude. And we had a wonderful, wonderful conversation for the patrons of this podcast. So if you'd like to support this show, literally keep the lights on around here, you can go to patreon.com/tonemob and you can hear the extended version of this conversation because we went on for, I think, around another hour or so. There's a ton of extra content over there and it is a massive help. It is $5 a month. And while that may not seem like all that much, when everybody gets together, it really adds up and quite literally pays my electric bill. So thank you very much for everyone that does that. And if you can't do that, I totally get it. I totally understand. But if you could share this show, you could share this with anybody you think might enjoy it, just send it to them. Tell them, come on, you got to check this out. And that helps immensely. Amplify that signal, get this out to as many people as you possibly can. And that is a huge thing for me. So thank you very much to everyone that's done that. Thank you for spending the time, and I will talk to you very soon. Bye-bye. One last thing before we totally sign off here. I just want to remind you that if you do any shopping at Stringjoy, that's Stringjoy guitar strings made in Nashville, that will help me out as well. As I've said for years, I'm heavily involved in that company, and I really do think they're making the best products on the market. So if you would like to try custom strings, go to tonemob.com/stringjoy and check them out today. I seriously love what the team down there is doing. I help them out with all kinds of things, and by you supporting them, you are also supporting me as well. And hey, you need some strings, so why not get some custom strings just for your guitar and playing style? Again, the link for that is tonemob.com/stringjoy, and that will take you right to their website, and you can do all your shopping through there, and that will help everyone involved out. So thank you very much. Talk to you next time. We are brought to you by the wonderful folks at Gun Street Wiring Shop. Yes, Gun Street Wiring Shop. I've talked about them before. I used to say based out of Bend, Oregon, but guess what? Sean moved to my neck of the woods. Sean's in Portland. Sean is awesome and has helped me with a bunch of stuff lately, and if you have wiring needs for your guitar, he can help you too. If you want to get weird with it, he can get weird. If you just need to spruce things up a little bit, there's your guy. He takes all the guesswork out of doing your guitar wiring, and he makes it simple, and his customer service is top-notch, and I can't say enough good things about Gunstreet as a company. I really respect Sean and what he's all about, and the product is top-notch. I've got 3 different guitars that now have Gunstreet harnesses in them, and I could not be happier. So go to gunstreetwiringshop.com and check them out.